This is why the Black Fleet is sent from the newly established Pacific port of San Francisco all the way out to Japan, which is the only geographic block that prevents China from accessing the Pacific if it runs all the way to Taiwan, which is kind of under Japanese control at the time as well. This is how a new nationalist American empire, an a counter-empire, checked the British Empire's aims in the Pacific. But that didn't prevent Jews from setting up shop in San Francisco. You guys remember Goldman, that prosecutor that was working for the Democrats to go after Trump? He's now going to be a congressman in New York City because he can tap into $1/5 of $1 billion in his Levi's Strauss fortune inheritance. That was all built in San Francisco because wherever the Navy goes, so do they go. They claim credit even for the British Navy that destroyed the Spanish Armada, and they see it as an act of vengeance for being tossed out of Spain in 1492. The father of the American nuclear navy. It doesn't mean that all these things are worthless or useless. It means that one of the innovations of nationalists is to see what makes global empires possible and use them in reverse, and understand that statecraft can be in your interest. You don't need to be an isolationist if it ends up with you being surrounded, but you can pull William Seward and send your college roommate, the great Hamiltonian economist Erasmus P. Smith, to Japan, teach them how to become a modern nation to protect themselves. To the point that
what happened to the South, though, to bring it back to the original point? Why didn't the South want to become a real American nationalist?
They were always British, and the British maintained that balance of power in the new American nation by playing both sides against each other. They kept the South economically subservient to the empire through King Cotton and the manipulation of cotton pricing, and also the manipulation of the flow and control of slavery. The Southern economy never left the Jewish finance-controlled aegis of the British Empire after the American Revolution. They maintained just a status of raw resource production and harvesting that could be turned into refined goods only in England to be sold throughout the rest of the empire. But of course, Parliament versus the King was the same tension in England that brought us into the revolution in the first place. Malton has talked about that, and I think you and Tarnsula have talked about that as well. And then in the North, you have the Rothschilds doing everything they can to fund whatever piece of the craven Yankee government they can get, or Southerners who ascend to power in the in the kind of intermediary DC Beltway. The Beltway is literally the dividing line between the North and the South, if you look at the Mason-Dixon line. And so it's no surprise that the Rothschilds attempt to capture a Southern president like Andrew Jackson. It's no surprise that
Woodrow Wilson.
Yeah, and Woodrow Wilson is the first president in the post-Civil War era from the South.
Yeah.
Southerners consider Woodrow Wilson to be a Southern president.
Greer loves Woodrow Wilson, too, by the way.
Yeah, he was a Southern president who was a puppet for British interests through the machinations of Colonel House. But the Southerners don't think this is inconsistent because they never have been American nationalists. You saw this, though, Stizzy. When the Queen died, how many Haley O'Connor, Matt Kipta, Scott Greer, Patrick Casey, Vector guys were like, God bless the Queen! God save the Queen! I'm a proud Southern American who's also a Queen lover. Here's how pernicious this shit was. It took
leader of the movement
creating a censorship-proof social media platform like Cozy.tv for American Zoomers to even discover the uniquely foundational American roots, modern nationalism, through nationalist economics and the invention of nativism by Alexander Hamilton.
Wait. What did Scott Greer say about Wilson? What did he say about him? I want to hear this.
Well, Scott Greer loves Wilson. He thinks that the World War I and World War II were both great Anglo-American victories.
He stands World War II?
Yeah, he does. If you ask him about it, if you push him on it, I have, so I know what he thinks. Unless he's changed his opinion since I last spoke to him. But if you ask him, hey, who was right in World War II? He's going to say, he's going to go into his criticism of Hitler, which I don't really remember, to be honest. And then he's going to say, but we're American and we should support our ancestors, which is always his default answer for everything, that whatever your ancestors do is good or whatever. So
we should support our ancestors committing suicide, basically. What?
Yeah, ask him about it. I'm serious. He'll tell you that. I'm not even being uncharitable.
That's bizarre to me.
I remember this shit is all just as new to Scott Greer. It's barely any newer to us. You're hearing BookCat and his scholars are guys that fucking rediscovered all this shit. And actually no one was ever able to have an empirical view of what existed before optical character recognition, keyword search, and the mass digitization of 85-90% of all volume printed material in human history in the English language was put on the internet and made searchable through these techniques.
Scott Greer
Erasmus
told me
Smith,
that the letters of George Washington are not available. You can't read them because Martha Washington burned them or some shit like that. And
yeah, well, William Seward never lived long enough to read James Dunwoody Bullock's memoirs.
That's
right?
just not true. You can read them. I was reading them. I posted like a 75 tweet thread of stuff that happened 20 years before the revolution. It's like the letters exist and you can just read them, but it's like, I don't know. It's kind of like what you were just saying.
What Stizzy,
how would they know before if they couldn't search for it?
Months before Scott Greer still can't go through is just the throes of what revisionism actually feels like in the service of nationalism. Revisionism, historical revisionism, is at the heart of every political movement, of every political realignment. It's not a critical reappraisal of the past in this case, though. It's uncovering the contemporaneous drivers of history as men in their own words, in their own time. And it hits different when John Adams talks about what you think has been reskinned. You don't know it's been reskinned as libertarianism. He says it's British free trade, right? And when Adams even has to couch his words when he talks about, what do you call them, like money changers or stock jobbers, right? Even they have to use circular terms.
No, he didn't. He didn't. He said he said nothing had come from London, but some stock jobbers exchanges. This place, meaning London, is full of. We should make a figure among the Hebrews if we should engage in this type of bubbles, but I would regret if we did so, something like that. So yeah. he named them like 3 times in a row, but yeah, stock jobbers was one of them. Yeah.
So, long story short, like the Southerners of the world who hate the John Adamses because they hate nationalism. They hate the idea that there's a unifying political project that they could be brought under because they won't give away the romantic idea of a mint julep or something that Jewish Hollywood instilled in their mind. Not any fact of history, but a revisionist project that kept the North and the South wedged apart after the British had the last great apostle of protectionism and the last great nationalist unifier of whites in America, William McKinley, murdered.
Let's go. McKinley murdered by Bong's theory. Let's go.
Yeah, McKinley murdered by Leon Chalkoff, who's under the auspices of British
Emma
Jewish
Goldman. What was her name?
Emma Goldman.
Yeah.
They constantly use these figures, constantly, and it's always to check nationalist impulses and interests. And you don't question why there's this continuous exploitative relationship between Jews and Southerners because it's just an extension of the empire. And the last beating heart of the original intent of the British Empire still lives in the South because it's the last untouched remnant of it. The Jewish exploitation of credulous whites through the financial system and playing them off against different types of former Anglos who are industrial and productive and do not allow themselves to be internally colonized as a resource harvester, and are Faustian men who understand that nationalism means that we, if working in concert, have the ability to do what the Arthurian myth was meant to paper over. The fact that men working in concert can bend a polity to its will and can unify a people with inventing even a shared culture and a shared history. And that's a threat to the rootless cosmopolitan wandering who that travels the world sowing discord, salami slicing, dividing and conquering people over the most minute grievances and differences. By continuing, their innovation was supposed to be revisionism. Their innovation was supposed to be, promoting libertarianism to unify the right under the aegis of Jewish financial imperatives. That's what brought the neoconservatives and paleoconservatives together, was the figure of a former Trotskyite communist that the FBI had to investigate before he turned into a snitch, Ronald Reagan. Because the failed opportunity before Reagan was Barry Goldwater, a crypto Jew who spent the last years of his life advocating for gay rights. Paul Singer is not some evil Machiavellian Jewish financier. If you ask him what he is, he says, I'm a Goldwater Republican. And who wrote Goldwater's presidential speeches? The man that the Claremont Institute and that West Coast Straussianism has all of its cultural capital and history vested in the figure of, Harry Jaffa, Leo Strauss's greatest graduate student. You guys don't even know what it means to be a fucking nationalist. It's a term to you because the media poisons your mind. It introduces you to people that you don't understand where they came into contact with your intellect via. It's like the Manchurian Candidate. You can't even explain how you know who these people are. You can't tell yourself what nationalism is because you've had your mind fucked like the rest of us by the people who work with catchphrases, by the nephews of Freud, right? By the Edward Bernays of the world, the inventors of PR. Your brain is warped by Pilpul. You literally are attached to sloganeering. But Nick's particular genius is to build a site that allows censorship-free communication. And the trick is that when you become a streamer, if you want to be effective and you want to take audience feedback, you want to basically pervert the ancient secrets of the Jews to nationalist white ends, then you start to become the media. I start to provide whole opinions for you in sentence-length form. And it might take 11 months to tell it to you in 30 minutes. But 2 weeks later, it takes 5 minutes. And maybe 10 years from now, you'll be able to tell 1 million people yourself in one sentence. But this is what fucks your mind up. And this is what the plantation that we're trying to lead you off of. And what you are hearing
That's right.
is Scott Greer kicking and fucking screaming as the nationalist lasso gets thrown around his body. Because we have more information than anyone in human history, and Malton isn't spending his time fucking around on TikTok. Malton isn't spending his time fucking around playing video games. Malton is making Gab posts 9 months ago. Every day I go to sleep excited to wake up and read more books. It's becoming the single greatest nationalist revisionist of this decade and maybe history. In the final analysis, if it propels America First to victory and plays no small role in converting Southerners into nationalists with us. That's what Malton is reading. Malton is applying skills that BookCat was the first to show all of us the possibility of applying. And he's out there searching with optical character recognition, keyword search for the primary sources of the major figures of American history in their own words about the pressures of statecraft of their time. And he's reading between the lines and he's learning what cements the ability of a group of men to maintain the stewardship to the ends of their own people over their own country. It's the great Jewish trick to divide and conquer the formerly Faustian European man, to bring his empire to heel, to switch hosts at the right moment when Hitler threatens the territorial sovereignty of the United Kingdom, to do incredibly what you could never orchestrate in the 300 years before the British Empire into doing. The British Empire is just a loose assortment of countries that you couldn't travel to now without getting diarrhea or breathing endless cow shit smoke. Like, what the fuck is India or the British half of Africa good for?
Man, that was so funny when they put on Tucker. They were like, this is a post office that was built during the colonial times. Isn't it beautiful? Wow, India's so great. And it's like, no, actually, India's not that great. Sorry.
Yeah, but they engineered an Anglo-American alliance of elites through bribery, through financial intrigue that the American public was never subject to. And then at the exact moment that the last great Hamiltonian, Adolf Hitler, threatened the global stranglehold of the British Empire's Jewish financiers, they jumped ship to Wall Street, and now the inheritors of that imperial project, you and I, are just cogs in this machine that does what the Jews never dreamed of for 1,200 years in exile in the Pale of Settlement. They control almost all of Europe. They control nearly the world's trade. They are doing that through your auspices because TV didn't exist to any great extent in 1940. What they could do with the internet and TV was much greater than they could do with the first 20 years of radio in the UK alone. It's just media. What do you think the fucking mass global application of Pilpul leads to? But here's the fucking irony, kids. The flattening that they've created and the destruction of cultures. By the time America First leads to an inevitable unification of Christendom on a global scale, by the time Pope Classical Theist and Rex Bellator, right, Crusade War King,
leader of the movement,
are 75 and are unifying a global empire under Christendom because Jews made everybody think that Zoomers were the cultural target of their being. And all Nick had to do was flip what that meant and give the glory to God through the presence of your media mastery. Because you're not watching a fucking Chinese TikToker speak English. They're watching you. So what happens when you give them something worthy of emulating? They know to emulate you. What happens when you give them something worthy of emulating? So you better hope you guys live to be 125, because that 100-year run is going to make 1850 to 1950 look like the first cave painting. So keep that shit in mind. The stakes couldn't be higher, and there's no one else coming. All of this early struggle is just predicated on unification, and that is the gift of nationalism.